Hello, I'm Maxime Agostini, co-founder and CEO of Ceres. And today we're going to talk about privacy and how to leverage private medical data for research, AI, or even statistics in a way that's efficient and privacy safe. You're probably aware of there's a lot of opportunity in using data, especially in the medical field. It's also a lot of pain. This number, 18 months, is the time it takes to start a project that uses the SNDS data according to a rapport du Sénat, a Sénat report. This is long. It can be shorter, but we're always talking about months before data can be accessible. And also, if you don't do it right, there's some, it can hurt a bit. Those are examples of fines in Europe, but also outside of Europe under GDPR for not complying with regulations. So what do we do at Ceres? We offer a way for researchers to work on data without accessing it. It works as in the picture here. The researcher or the data scientist can manipulate a data set that they don't have access to, and we make it very seamless for them. They can do exactly the research as they would, should they have the data on their computer, but the data is never on the computer. It remains in the infrastructure of the data owner. It could be a hospital, it could be a research center. And we operate on behalf of them and manipulate the real data. But that's not it. We also want to be sure that when results go back to the researcher, there's no private information in the results. So we have this technology that makes every computation privacy safe. For those who are familiar, we use a concept called differential privacy, which is the gold standard of privacy. So whenever you do research on a data set, every information that you're extracting is going to be protected by this high standard. Differential privacy has been invented a bit more than 10 years ago, and now it's become the standard of all privacy research. So now you have the opportunity to leverage all data sets, no matter how sensitive, because you never see them. So you can have data sets that have a lot of personal information, so a lot of medical information. If you've played with patient records, usually there's text in it. In the text, there might be many, many ways to re-identify a patient. It could be the name, well, that's probably easy to remove, but it could be something in the case that's specific to one patient. It could be the time of day, the series of comorbidities. All of those could be re-identifying. So they're problematic if you want to share this data with someone. You can't claim it's pseudonymous. With Ceres, you can leverage 100% of it. The data is never accessible. You can play with the data that stays remote. Also makes the entire processes faster, especially if you want to be compliant with regulations in all of Europe, especially in France. The level requirements for the entrepôt de données de santé is pretty high. The referential is pretty high. There's a lot of constraints on how you can make data available for research. And when you use Ceres, the data is never copied, is never transferred to a separate environment. You don't need to handle multiple copies of the data. You can start a project with the data that remains in the original place. It's made available, but not as data, but as a potential for a research project. And finally, this is not by compromising on compliance and security, actually quite the opposite. We make it 100 times safer to do those projects from the perspective of privacy. Because again, like most of research today assumes a researcher will have the data on their computer. This data is at risk, no matter how good the researcher might be. They may lose their computer. There might be caches that might be copied or leaked down the road. There might also be rogue employees or that leak data deliberately, but that's the exception. It's more or less exposed to misuse or mishandling of data. With Ceres, there's no such risk because the data stayed in the original, whether it's a hospital or the research environment, it remained in the original environment, remained in the original geography, was never copied out, and there's no need to track all the copies. So I want to talk a bit about some use cases. The first one is really to streamline operations in data warehouses, entrepôt de données de santé. It's easier to have a lot of people work on multiple data sets without having to handle, the level of requirements of the entrepôt de données de santé in France is pretty high. This makes it 10 times easier. Another example is federated analytics. Usually there's not enough data in one single location. So for example, you may want to leverage data from multiple hospitals from a particular research project. With Ceres, you don't compound the complexity of having all those independent research projects requiring different access to data. You leave the data in different hospitals, it could be in different countries too, and you work on this federated data set without moving data around. The idea of having different countries here highlights like the complexity from a regulatory perspective. It's hard enough with one country. If you have different countries, it makes it almost impossible. And finally, you can leverage finer data in your research. Sometimes you may compromise on the granularity of data for a particular research project, so it can be deemed as pseudonymous, and you may lose the ability. We have an example, for example, where they had removed dates and times because it might be too easy to identify people, but now they're lacking the ability to do seasonality analysis because this data is not granular enough. This is one of many examples of the compromise that you make by deleting information from the data for the purpose of your research. Here, you can keep the full power, the full potential on all of your data sets. So I want to talk about two use cases. One is with a clinical research organization where we help them streamline operations, how they source, find the data for their projects, but also how they manipulate those data sets in a compliant fashion. It's an international organization, so there are analysts that are in different countries. They can't just share data sets across all those analysts. When a client of theirs, a pharmaceutical company in the US, wants to do a specific analysis on a particular problem, a particular topic, they can't just say, oh, well, here's the data set, do the analysis, because that would mean making private medical information from European citizens available to a US entity. But with SARUS, there's no such transfer of access to information. So that streamlines access within the organization. Also, it opens the opportunity to build new projects, new products, where their clients can query the data directly without ever moving this data across to share with the client. Another example is with Hôpital Foch in France, that we worked with them last year on a research project where they were launching a competition for startups to study an anesthesia data set. And all the candidates were able to use SARUS to just assess the potential of these data sets for a particular research project. They submitted their application and say, okay, well, I want to study this and this part. All of this without having to have access to the data. It's hard enough to create share data to one participant. You can't imagine having dozens of startups that just all of a sudden have access to a data set to just submit an application for a particular contest. So we've worked with them to streamline those operations of bringing a lot of potential to the data platform. So those are a couple of examples. We have a booth. You're welcome to come and say hi. We also have a nice demo there where we showed that you could use SARUS to train generative AI models. So I've taken examples or simple statistics, but it applies to machine learning and generative AI. And when you do train generative AI models, you want to be very careful with privacy. They're really good, they're sponges, those LLMs, in the sense that they will learn everything by heart. And we have a chatbot that has been trained without privacy and one with privacy. And you'll see that the one that hasn't been trained with privacy guarantees is going to reveal secrets if you try. There's a nice game to play. But thank you. And we have a minute and a half for demo for questions.
Maybe one question.
Yeah.
How long does it take to do the setup?
It's from a technical perspective, it's very straightforward. The solution deploys within the hospital or the architecture. Usually, the conversation is more with security. We want to make sure we have a couple of conversations with security and compliance to just design the processes around the actual installation. But technical, it's just an hour.
So I was looking at if you want to deploy something like that on, say, 10, 20 hospitals.
Well, those conversations, usually you can have them kind of once. You do have to have, for every single DPO and security officer from the hospitals, you want to have the conversation, but the answers are always the same. So I would say a day per hospital is probably a good estimate. We have 30 seconds. Yeah. One question. The last one.
Maybe it's going to be short, but...
Okay, concretely, just how it works. Do you have an SDK to develop your own AI application on SARUS, or do you have open source SDK available?
So the software runs in the hospital in a secure environment. So it's deployed using Kubernetes or Docker in a hospital. And the data scientist or researcher uses our Python SDK or our SQL interface. So, and anyone can install it.
Thank you.
Thank you.